Montana Territory, 1879. The sky burned orange behind the crazy mountains, and Kenzie Ellard was standing barefoot in her yard, holding a shotgun with one hand and wiping dust off her cheek with the other when the cowboy rode up. His horse was lathered and his hat pulled low, but he drew up slow, respectful, like he understood a woman alone might not welcome company without warning. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice low and even. "Just need water for my horse and maybe a place to rest before the storm rolls in." Kenzie narrowed her eyes. "You alone?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked past him, toward the horizon. Nothing but wind and dust. She nodded once. "Water's out back. You can sleep in the barn. There's clean hay." He tipped his hat. "Thank you." His name was Yates Trenton. Tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet. He moved like a man who had known hard years. Plain shirt, frayed cuffs, and a long scar running from his ear to his jaw. He did not ask questions, just unsaddled his horse, brushed it down, and fed it like it was something precious. Kenzie watched from the porch. She had not let a man near this place in nearly 3 years. Not since Thomas Ellard died in a mining collapse and left her with 2 children and a house full of silence. She had not cried for him. Not once. Thomas had been her husband, but never her choice. Now, her children were gone too. She still heard their voices sometimes. Jamie, 8, always asking if he could ride the fence line. June, 6, always singing to the chickens. They had been taken from her by Thomas's brother, who claimed a widow running a dry farm alone could not raise them proper. He had money and a lawyer in Helena. She had calloused hands and a marriage certificate that meant nothing to a judge. Kenzie had been 23 when it happened. She was 26 now. She had not seen her children in 3 years. That night, lightning flashed far off in the mountains. Yates sat by her cook fire, eating beans and bacon she had split with him. He did not talk much, just listened. When she told him about the judge and the children, and how she sometimes still set 2 plates out by accident, he did not offer pity. He said, that was wrong. They had no right. She looked up. "You believe me?" "I do." The fire crackled between them. She studied his face. He had kind eyes. Tired, but kind. "You married?" she asked. "No, ever." "No," she nodded. "Smart." He smiled, just a little. "Maybe." The storm did not come, though the wind howled all night. In the morning, he was still there, helping her haul water and chop wood like it was his own place. She did not ask him to go. Days passed, then a week. He stayed, and she let him. Not because she needed help, though she did, but because he never assumed. Never told her what she should do. Never reached for her without asking. He was the first man who ever asked what she wanted. One evening, they sat on the porch. She was peeling apples for drying. He was mending a bridle by lantern light. "Do you want them back?" he asked. She looked up. "My children." He nodded. She swallowed. "Every day." He said nothing for a while, just kept threading the needle through cracked leather. Then he said, "I could help you get them." She stared at him. "You would do that? For me?" He met her eyes. "Yes." Something inside her cracked open. She had not been touched in 3 years. Had not been kissed in longer than that. But that night, when she stood close to him beneath the stars, he touched her cheek with the back of his fingers and said softly, "Kenzie, may I?" She whispered, "Yes." And when he kissed her, it was careful, reverent, like he was afraid to break something already shattered. He held her that night, in the hayloft, while the wind rattled the barn doors. He did not ask for more, just held her. She had never known a man to be gentle like that. In the morning, she found him standing by the corral, watching the sun rise. She walked up beside him. "You still mean what you said?" "I do." She nodded. "Then I will ride with you." He turned to her. "Are you sure? I want my children back. And I want to stop being afraid." He stepped close, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You will not do it alone." So they packed what they could. She took her father's rifle. He brought his saddlebag and a tin of coffee. They left a note for the neighbor who watched her chickens sometimes and rode out at dawn. Helena was 5 days' ride. Kenzie had not seen it since the court hearing. The thought of returning made her chest tight, but Yates rode beside her the whole way, never rushing, never pushing. They slept beside rivers and under pine trees. He brewed coffee in a dented tin pot and told her about the cattle drive he had abandoned in Texas, the brother he lost in the war, and the way he always felt more at home under open sky than inside four walls. She listened. And then she told him things she had never told anyone. How she used to dream of being a schoolteacher. How she hated the way Thomas had always spoken for her, even in church. How she sometimes woke up not knowing what day it was. Yates never looked away. By the time they rode into Helena, her hand found his without thinking. They stopped at a boarding house just past the courthouse square. She washed the trailed dust from her hair and tried not to tremble. Yates stood behind her, steady as ever. "You do not have to go in alone," he said. "I need to," she said. "But I want you waiting when I come out." "I will be." She stepped inside the courthouse, heart pounding. And for the first time in her life, she walked in as herself Kenzie Ellard, a woman who had lost too much, but was done letting men decide what she could keep. The courthouse hallway smelled of ink, varnish, and old wool. Kenzie walked past the brass spittoon, past the framed listing of judges' names, and stepped into the clerk's office. Her boots were quiet on the floorboards, but her pulse thudded loud in her ears. A balding man behind the desk looked up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" She kept her voice steady. "I'm here to see Judge Farley." His eyes narrowed slightly. "He's in chambers." "What's the nature of your business?" "I'm filing for custody review. My name is Kenzie Ellard." The name hung between them a moment. He leaned back, expression shifting, but not softening. "That case was settled 3 years ago." She tightened her grip on her shawl. "I have grounds to contest that settlement. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to speak with the judge." He tapped the desk with his pencil, then stood. "Wait here." She did. The seconds stretched long. Through the window, she saw Yates across the street, leaning against a hitching post, one boot crossed over the other. A woman in a green dress passed him and said something. He nodded politely and said nothing back. Judge Farley looked older than she remembered, his beard more white than gray now, his gait slower. He stepped into the room, eyes settling on her with vague recognition. "Mrs. Ellard, I thought we were finished." Her hands didn't shake. "I've returned to request a hearing. I have evidence that the children's uncle is neglecting them. I've spoken with a neighbor in Butte who's seen them barefoot in winter, unattended while he drinks at the saloon." Farley exhaled, rubbed his chin. "I'll need affidavits. I have one, and I'll get more." He studied her a moment. "Come back tomorrow. 9 sharp. Bring anything you've got." She nodded once. "Thank you." Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of distant snow. Yates straightened as she crossed the street. "Did he hear you out?" "He'll see me again tomorrow." He opened his palm, and she fit her hand into it without thinking. They walked back toward the boarding house. Their steps matched. She didn't speak until they reached the stoop. "I'll need to visit the boarding school in Butte. The teacher there may be willing to speak to the judge. I'll ride with you." She glanced at him. "It's 2 days there and 2 back." "I know." In the room that night, she sat at the wash basin brushing her hair, and he stayed near the window, watching the lamps flicker across the street. "Do you ever regret the places you stayed too long?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Only the ones I left too soon." She set the brush down. "Why'd you leave Texas?" "There was a girl." She didn't wait. "Did you ask her to?" "No. I never gave her a reason to." She crossed the floor slowly. "And me?" He looked at her then. "I'd wait as long as you asked." She reached for his hand. "I don't want you to wait. I want you to ride beside me." He nodded once. "Then we'll leave at first light." They rode southwest, the land changing as the days passed, cattle pastures giving way to rocky hills, trees thinning to wind-cut scrub. A light snow fell the second morning, dusting their shoulders as they stopped near a frozen creek to water the horses. Kenzie crouched to fill her canteen, her breath fogging the air. "When you were small, what did you want to be?" He crouched beside her. "Alive. That was enough. My mother taught me how to read with a Bible and an almanac. I used to pretend I was teaching a room full of girls." He looked sideways at her. "You still could." She capped the canteen. "You really think a woman like me could be anything more than a mistake no one wants to admit?" He didn't smile. "I know a woman like you could build a whole life from ash and not ask anyone's permission." That evening, they made camp beneath a rocky overhang. The wind cut sharp, so he built the fire close and banked it with stones. She huddled near, her fingers red with cold. He handed her a wrapped bundle. "Dry socks." She opened it, folded neatly, worn but warm. "You carry these for yourself?" "I do. But you need them more tonight." She pulled them on slowly. "You do things like it's not a favor." "It isn't." Later, She lay curled against his side beneath the blanket, her back to the fire. The horses moved quietly nearby, shifting in their tether lines. She whispered, "I've never known what it felt like to be chosen." His voice was a low thread in the dark. "Then let me be the first." She turned, her forehead resting against his collarbone. "I won't belong to anyone. Not again. I don't want you to belong to me. I want you to belong with me." She nodded once, eyes closing. They reached Butte the next afternoon. The schoolhouse was a rectangle of clapboard and shuttered windows, perched near the edge of the mining camp. A woman in a plain dress, hair pinned back tight, opened the door. Kenzie stepped forward. "My name is Kenzie Ellard. I believe you've taught my daughter, June." The teacher's eyes softened. "Yes, bright girl. She reads above her level. Always asks for more." Kenzie's throat tightened. "I'm trying to bring her and her brother home. Would you speak to a judge about their care?" "I would." She signed a document with a steady hand. Yates stood outside, speaking to no one, but watching everything. That night, Kenzie sat on the edge of the bed in the boarding room above the dry goods store. Her fingers traced the folded affidavit in her lap. Yates brought in a tin cup of heated cider, set it down next to her. She looked up. "You believe this will work?" "I believe in you." She stood and walked to him slowly. "I can't give you land or money. I don't even know what comes next." He tilted his head. "I didn't come for any of that." She placed her hand flat against his chest. "Then stay. For me." He covered her fingers with his own. "Always." And when she kissed him, it was not careful. It was certain. The wind coming down off the divide was colder than before, though the snow hadn't deepened. Kenzie rode with her collar turned up, her scarf tucked tight, the affidavit rolled safe in her saddlebag. They reached Helena again by mid-morning on the fourth day, hooves clapping steady against frozen ruts. The courthouse loomed ahead, its brick rough with soot and age. She dismounted without help. Yates waited near the door, arms folded, not offering words she didn't ask for. She glanced at him once before stepping inside. Judge Farley's chambers were warmer than the hallway, but only just. A coal stove ticked in the corner. He sat at a clean desk, spectacles balanced low on his nose. Kenzie handed him the paper, her jaw set. "I've brought a sworn statement from Miss Callahan at the Butte schoolhouse. She teaches both my children." Farley read in silence. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "You've clearly sought out the truth, Mrs. Ellard." Her throat was dry. "I've had time to learn what truth costs." He leaned back. "Their uncle will need to be notified. He has 30 days to respond. You'll be required to appear again after that, with any additional testimony." She nodded once. "I'll be here." Outside, the clouds hung low, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. She stepped into the light, her breath showing. Yates didn't ask. He just waited. 30 days, she said. He lifted his reins. "Then we make the best of the wait." They rode out to the edge of town, stopping at a weathered parcel of land tucked between creek and hill. A widow named Hester ran a livery and let them rent a cabin with a working stove and a roof that didn't leak. It stood near the timberline, far enough from the main road that the quiet felt like shelter, not exile. That first evening, Kenzie unpacked the dried beans and cornmeal she'd brought from home. Yates started a fire, then stepped out to split kindling. She watched him through the window, his movements careful and measured, like a man who knew exactly how much force a thing could take before it cracked. Inside, she stirred the pot with the back of a wooden spoon. Her hands had stopped trembling. Later, over supper, he asked, "When they come home, what do you want for them?" She thought a long moment. "A fence garden, a table with 4 chairs, and quiet, but not the kind that hurts." He nodded slowly. "We could build that." She met his eyes across the firelight. "What would you build if it were yours to shape?" He looked down at his bowl, then back up. "A barn that doesn't leak, a roof that holds, and a woman who wants to speak her mind without waiting for permission." She reached across and touched his wrist. "You already have those last 2. For the next weeks, they fell into rhythm. She swept the floor each morning, boiled coffee, and read aloud from a tattered almanac she'd found on the shelf. He repaired the fence, mended tack, and hunted when the larder ran low. They didn't speak of the hearing unless there was something new to say. Some mornings, she woke to find him already gone, a note left in his place never written, only a carved sign left in the woodpile or a fresh rabbit skinned and cleaned on the stoop. One night, as sleet tapped against the window, she set her sewing aside. I used to believe stillness meant being forgotten, she said. But this doesn't feel like being left behind. He set down the tin cup. It's the first time I've ever felt like stopping didn't mean giving up. She stood and crossed the room to where he sat on the low stool. Her hand found the side of his neck, her thumb brushing the curl of his collar. You've asked what I wanted, she murmured. Let me tell you plain. He stilled. I want to raise them with someone who sees me. Not just the shape of me or the work I do. I want to wake up and know I'm not bracing for the next blow. He rose, slow and sure, and rested his forehead against hers. Then let's be the kind of people they can trust to come home to. When he kissed her, it was with a deep, quiet certainty, not discovery, but promise. In the days that followed, they prepared. She wrote out lists, stitched new hems on the children's old clothes she'd saved. Yates carved a small box with a sliding lid and lined it with rabbit fur. For June, he said. She can keep her buttons in it. They never said aloud what would happen if the judge ruled against them. It wasn't hope they clung to, but the shape of the life they were already making. On the 30th day, the summons came. She tucked it into her pocket, turned to Yates, and said only, "It's time." He nodded, his hand warm on her back as they stepped into the cold. The courthouse was quieter than Kenzie remembered. She sat on the worn bench outside the hearing room, hands folded in her lap, her shawl pulled close to her neck. Yates stood a few paces away, arms crossed, his hat in one hand. There was nothing left to prepare. No more affidavits to gather, no more questions to rehearse. It would be the judge, the uncle, and the truth of what she'd done with her sorrow. The door opened. A clerk leaned out. "Mrs. Ellard." "This way." Yates didn't follow. He only met her gaze, steady and calm, and gave a single nod. She rose and stepped into the hearing room. The walls were paneled in dark wood, the windows shuttered against the wind. At the far end, Judge Farley sat behind a high desk, his ledger open. Across from him, seated stiffly in a frayed coat, was Martin Ellard. Kenzie hadn't seen Thomas's brother since the last hearing. His beard had gone patchy, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't rise when she entered. The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellard, you've requested that custody of your children be returned to you. We've reviewed the affidavits and statements. Today you'll speak to the court directly." She didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor." Farley gestured. "Proceed." Kenzie stepped forward. "I came back because I've built a home that's ready for them. It's warm, it's safe, and it's mine. I've worked land with my own hands, not because it was easy, but because it was the only thing I had left." Farley rested his pen. "And their uncle?" She turned to face Martin. "He took them when I couldn't fight back. Said I wasn't fit. But I know my children's birthdays. I know June writes with her left hand, and Jamie hates the sound of thunder. I know the way they sleep, and what calms them, and how to keep them from coughing through the winter. I may not have had the money to fight him then, but that doesn't mean I was wrong." Martin finally looked up. "You think you can just show up after 3 years and take them?" "I'm not showing up," she said. "I've come back." He scoffed. "What have you got to offer them out there? A shack and a stranger?" Kenzie didn't raise her voice. "A man who doesn't drink himself blind while children go hungry. A man who made room for them before he ever laid a hand on me." Martin started to speak again, but Farley raised his hand. "I've heard enough." The silence after was heavy. Farley looked between them both. "I'll issue my ruling by the week's end. You'll be notified when it's time to collect the children, should the court decide in your favor." Kenzie bowed her head. "Thank you." Outside, the wind was sharper than before, and clouds had gathered low over the rooftops. She stepped down the courthouse steps slowly, her boots finding each tread with care. Yates met her at the bottom. "What did he say?" She exhaled. "We'll know soon." He didn't press. He only offered his arm, and she took it. That night, back at the cabin, she sat by the stove mending the hem on June's dress. Yates was oiling the hinges on the door, crouched low with a lantern beside him. The fire hissed softly. She didn't look up when she said, "Martin was right about one thing. I am bringing them to something small." Yates didn't answer at first. Then, small's a word men use when they don't know the value of quiet. She set the needle down. "Jamie's going to ask questions." "He always did. Then we answer them. All of them. With the truth." She turned to face him. "And if he doesn't believe we're good enough?" Yates stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. "We don't need to be good enough. We just need to be there. Every morning. Every night. That's what holds. She watched him a long moment, then said, I want to wake up knowing it's ours. Not borrowed. Not borrowed from pain. He crossed the room slowly. Then say it. Her voice was soft. Stay. He reached for her hand. I already did. 2 days later, a rider came up from town with a sealed letter. Kenzie held it in her lap a full minute before opening it. Her hands didn't shake. The ruling was clear. Custody granted. Immediate transfer permitted. She stood and walked to the table, where Yates was tying a bundle of dried meat with cotton string. She set the letter down beside him. They're coming home. He looked at her, then down at the paper. How soon? As soon as we get to Butte. They left before sunrise the next morning. The road was hard-packed, but their pace was steady. Snow clung to the edges of the creek beds now, and the pines whispered with wind. They didn't speak much, but when she glanced over, his expression was the same as it had been the first time she saw him ride into her yard, quiet, watchful, and sure. They reached Butte on the second morning. June and Jamie were waiting inside the schoolhouse, their satchels packed and their coats buttoned. June held her brother's hand tightly. Kenzie stepped through the door, heart thudding. Jamie looked up first. He didn't run, didn't speak. Kenzie knelt. You ready to come home? He looked at June. She nodded, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Jamie followed, his cheek pressed to her shoulder. Kenzie held them both, her eyes closed. They rode out by noon. Jamie rode with Yates, who kept the pace even and the reins loose. June sat in front of Kenzie, her head against her chest. They stopped once, near a bend in the road, to rest the horses. Kenzie crouched in front of Jamie. You remember the hill where the creek bends east? He nodded. That's where we'll plant the apple trees. He looked up at her. We're staying. As long as we want. He turned to Yates, then back. Is he staying too? Kenzie looked over at the man who'd never tried to fill silence with promises. Yes, he is. Jamie nodded once. Then, after a pause, can I ride by myself tomorrow? Kenzie smiled. We'll see. They reached the cabin just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the door held fast in its frame. Inside, it was warm, and the smell of firewood clung to the rafters. Yates unrolled the children's blankets. June found the carved box on the shelf and opened it without a word. Jamie stood near the window, watching the trees bend with wind. Kenzie leaned against the doorframe, her heart full and aching. Yates stepped beside her. You still want the garden? She looked at him. I want everything. He rested his hand at the small of her back. Then we'll build it. Winter settled soft and deep over the hills by mid-December. The days turned short, and the light that filtered through the frost-laced windows never reached far into the cabin. Kenzie rose before the sun each morning, careful not to wake June curled beneath the quilt beside her. Jamie slept across the room, one arm flung over the edge of the cot he now claimed as his own. Yates was always last to come in at night, snow dusting his shoulders, bringing with him the scent of pine and cold air. They had not spoken yet of what name to give what they were building, but it lived in the way their hands found each other at the table, and how he waited for her to speak before speaking himself. One morning, Kenzie found June standing on a stool, turning the pages of the almanac. You looking for something? She asked. June didn't glance up. It says strawberries can grow here, but only after the last frost. Kenzie nodded. That's true. Can we plant some? If we clear the south patch by spring, we can try. June turned the page slowly. Will we still be here in spring? We will. Outside, Yates was chopping wood, sleeves rolled up past the elbow. Jamie was helping, carrying split logs to the lean-to. He didn't speak much to Yates yet, but he followed his lead, matching his rhythm without being told. That evening, Kenzie set 2 bowls by the hearth, one with dried oats and the other with clean water. For the mice, she said when Jamie raised an eyebrow. They'll stay out of the grain sacks if they've got their own corner. Jamie didn't laugh, but his mouth twitched, and his eyes found hers longer than they used to. After supper, Yates brought out a small bundle wrapped in a square of burlap. He set it on the table and looked to June. I made you something, he said. Might help you with your learning. She opened it carefully. Inside was a slate board with a smooth wooden frame and a short stick of chalk tied with string. Her mouth parted, but she said nothing at first. Then, thank you. Try it out. he said, and she did, writing her name, each letter slow and deliberate. Kenzie watched her daughter, then turned to Yates. She'll outpace me soon. He leaned closer, his voice quiet. Then we'll both have to keep up. Later, after the children had gone to sleep, Kenzie stood by the back door, watching snow gather along the fence line. Yates stepped behind her, his hands settling lightly on her hips. She asked if we'd still be here in spring, she said. What did you tell her? The truth. He was quiet a moment. Then, I've been thinking on land. She turned. What kind of land? There's a parcel down by the creek bend. Hester says the man who held the deed passed on last summer. No heirs. It's going up for sale come March. Kenzie swallowed. You'd buy it. I'd build on it. With you. She stepped closer, her palms flat against his chest. You mean to stay? I mean to belong here. With you. With them. Her breath caught. Is this you asking? It is. She didn't answer with words. She reached up, laced her fingers behind his neck, and kissed him with everything she hadn't known how to ask for before. It was not soft. It was sure. When she pulled back, her voice was steady. Then yes, I want that. All of it. The thaw came late, but when it did, it came fast. Snow slid from the rooftops in heavy sheets, and the creek swelled with meltwater. Yates signed the deed with a steady hand, and by the second week of April, they'd broken ground. Kenzie cleared stones while June marked rows with a stick. Jamie helped Yates raise the first wall of the barn, his arms lean but strong now, his voice deeper than it had been when he arrived. One morning, Kenzie found a cedar box on the table, carved with a plume of wild roses. Inside was a silver ring, simple and smooth. Yates stepped into the doorway behind her. I don't have a preacher or a witness. She turned. I don't need one. He crossed the distance, took her hand in his. Then let's call this what it is. She slid the ring on herself. A beginning. They were married by the creek that June, under a sky so blue it looked painted. Hester stood witness, and Jamie carried a small bouquet June had gathered from the woods. There were no speeches, only the sound of Yates's voice saying, I vow to stay, and Kenzie answering, I vow to choose this. Every day, years passed, but the fence never sagged, and the roof never leaked. Strawberries bloomed each spring in the south patch. Kenzie taught June to sew and Jamie to read maps. Yates built a swing beneath the cottonwood and strung a bell on the barn for when supper was ready. When folks from town passed by, they said the place looked lived in, not just worked. And when they asked who kept it so, Kenzie would smile, her hand finding Yates's, and say, we do. Together. And it was true. It always would be.